All right. Good morning, everyone. This is Curt and I have my colleague here, Bill Maccarone, and we're here for another edition of Fire Law Roundup for March 4th of 2024. Bill, go ahead. Take us away.
Absolutely. Good morning. Thanks for having me. So the first case we're going to talk about from last week, well, actually the one from last night, the first case we'll talk about is out of New York, and it's a fire district in New York that, like many fire districts, I have a feeling is probably sets their own tax rate upon the, it's not like a municipal fire department. It's more of a district where they set their own tax rate and collect their own taxes, et cetera. And this particular district opted to significantly increase their budget from previous year. I guess the last year's budget, the 2023 budget was 86,000. And this year for 2024, they came in at 180. So understandably, I'm sure some folks are kind of that caught some of their taxpayer folks, the folks that live in the district, a little bit off guard with that kind of an increase. And as a result, four individuals decided they were going to sue the district for making such a significant increase. And the law that they're claiming this violates the New York State law, obviously, that controls this. In New York State, I'm certainly not an expert on New York State laws, but they have a lot of regulations related to fire districts. I think more than many states do. And it's because of anyone that's been in New York State or worked in New York State, traveled, et cetera. In the fire service, you see that there are a lot of districts, that's kind of just the way that the state is set up. So as a result, there's a lot of regulations that go along with those districts. So here, these four taxpayers are saying that this was illegal to turn around and take a budget of 86,000. You could increase it somewhat, and I think it's a percentage where it's the increase can be the rate of inflation plus 2% is kind of the cap.
Oh, no, it's either 2%. It's actually pretty well written, I think, from a lot of those laws. You really don't have an ability to take into account inflation.
Okay.
Anything over a certain percent, you have to get that super majority, they call it. In terms of taxpayer approval, but they said 2% or the inflation rate for the year.
Yeah.
And so as long as you stay within that, you don't have to get a super majority. All you need at your financial meeting is a majority.
Yeah. However, here these folks are kind of raising this as an issue, saying that the district's not allowed to kind of have that kind of a huge increase. And it's kind of I don't want to say it's a technicality, it's certainly a technicality, but it's a question of law, whether or not the district's defense right now appears to be to say, hey, listen, it doesn't really matter because there is a regulation and the regulation is well written, like Curt said. However, citizens don't have a right to enforce it. It's more the comptroller's office, right? I think that's who they have in New York State that covers that. And
right, and our colleague Brad Pinsky is defending the fire district in this case, and that's going to be the position he's taking. Whether or not that's going to prevail, it's probably a question of first impression here about whether or not individual taxpayers are going to be allowed to enforce this, or is it going to be the state comptroller that's going to enforce it?
And sometimes, especially in this instance, you could have a situation where the court says, yeah, no, it's, the state comptroller, obviously we're hypothesizing here, that they could say, yeah, the state comptroller's office is the only person that can bring this up. And next week, the state comptroller might go to the district and say, hey, by the way,
Well, none of that gets to the real merits here in terms of whether or not the fire district did, in fact, comply with the law. The suit is alleging that they didn't comply. Maybe they did. We don't know. So you have that question of law, which is, can the taxpayers enforce this law, or is it going to be the comptroller? And then you have the question of fact: did they in fact violate the law? And then even if you did, what's the consequence?
Yeah, that's true too. I think of that last part.
Something where the board members get fined from the ethics commission or some other way of doing it, but you get to keep the money, or do you have to refund the money, or do you put the money in some sort of an escrow and then use it over future years and so on and so forth? A whole bunch of things that have to be addressed. And that's just how New York handles it. It's not necessarily how other states are going to handle it.
Yeah, no, very true. Very true. Very much it's New York specific.
Yeah. So yeah, let's you ready to get on to the next one here?
Yeah, yes and no. This is not. I got to tell you, in reviewing these cases, Curt, these are not very uplifting cases. That was for folks that are looking for something to uplift you. The one we just covered, that's the one that's going to get you for this week. The rest of them really just.
And I feel that sometimes when I lecture, Bill, that you lecture with a guy like Gordon Graham, and there's a number of other guys, a few instructors at the National Fire Academy, that you come away from their lectures and you're like energized,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And
Not
then we
today.
start, as lawyers, we start talking, and it's like, oh my God, did I choose the right profession? And
Yeah. No.
but it's not uplifting.
No, this is a tough situation all around. I mean, I can see every side of this, and obviously I don't know any of the deep down specific facts, but back in 2022, the underlying story, the backstory, so to speak, is back in 2022. There was a brush fire, reported brush fire. I think it was a brush fire that city of Colorado Springs firefighters responding to in a brush truck, like in kind of like one of those big F350s, F550 type of a brush truck type of a vehicle. And my understanding is he was in a city park and along these paths that go through the city park responding to this brush fire. Unfortunately, there was a homeless woman, unbeknownst to anybody, that was sleeping under a pile of blankets and debris on this pathway that this firefighter was navigating the truck down. He assumed it was just kind of probably some trash or some debris that was on the trail. And he went over the poor woman, and as a result, she died. And it's terrible. I mean, certainly he did, when on its face, if you're gonna do it again, would you do it the same way? Absolutely not. But who thinks of this, right? And I think that's, we all wrestle with that. You come around the corner and there's debris, you go over it, you go into the fire, and then come to find out at the end that there was someone under there. So it's just a horrible situation. As a result of that accident, the city stood behind the firefighter. I think it seems to everything, looking at the facts of the case and the leading up to this most recent settlement, the city kind of stood behind the firefighter, recognizing that this was a horrible accident, and let's try to get through this together, it seems. Obviously, the family, it was the daughter, I believe, of the woman that was killed, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the city and the fire department, et cetera. And the city ended up settling it. The news this week is the city settled that death suit for $160,000. So I guess, assuming this kind of at least closes that story, this at least kind of closes that whole situation.
I think it does, and it's set the driver of the brush unit ended up being charged criminally. And he subsequently pled to a misdemeanor. I didn't see where the specifics of what misdemeanor it was, but he was originally charged with a felony death resulting charge, and he ended up pleading to a lesser charge. I believe he's still employed. My understanding, I haven't seen.
I believe he retired. I believe that one of the news stories I was looking this morning said that he recently retired.
I can't blame him.
No, and that's part of as a battalion chief, managing a shift of firefighters, for the most part, young kids. It's so hard to just get to it. Just being in the right doesn't necessarily make this right, and it does, and that's what you have to really be considering all the time, right? And you just, you can be in the right legally, which unfortunately they found at least a portion of the criminal statute where the operator was negligent in some way, and they applied that. But even when you're not, you still have to live with that, right? You still have to kind of, and it's certainly no fault of anybody, in my opinion, no fault of anybody in this situation. The poor woman that's homeless, living under a blanket. This poor guy, it's going to a call. It's just it's a horrible situation.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to the next one, Cleveland. And Bill, I know you kind of follow what we've been doing here. Excuse me. Brad and I have been tracking a number of cases over the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
They all come out the same way.
Yeah.
And it has to do with whether or not a fire department can require firefighters to not have a beard at the SCBA interface, the mask interface. One of the leading cases that set the newest tone was out of FDNY. And there was a number of suits. FDNY, there was, I think, Atlantic City, Jacksonville, Florida, and Cleveland. I'm sure I'm missing a couple there, but all in the last 2 to 3 years, they alleged a variety of claims: race discrimination, disability discrimination, First Amendment, a lot of different due process claims. And a lot of this goes back, some of this anyway, goes back to a decision out of the DC Fire Department, Washington, DC Fire Department, back in the 90s, early 2000s, where a court basically granted the firefighters the right to have beards. And we've talked about this before. Brad and I have talked about it before, and I don't know if you were privy to that, if you had listened to that conversation that we had, but there was a strategic error that the DC attorneys had made in that decision. And they had two ways to argue at a trial. One was to argue that positive pressure SCBA it still needed to have no hair at the interface. The other one was a negative PAPR, or a negative pressure breathing apparatus, which they were issuing after 9/11. And so all firefighters and police officers had this negative pressure mask as well. And so the attorney said, you know what, let's concede the positive pressure aspect. Let's just give that to them, but we're going to fight on the negative pressure because it's an easier case to make. And they did that. So they conceded the positive pressure, but they said, we can uphold this on the negative pressure. And there was a series of, I guess, questions asked during trial. Has anyone ever worn a negative pressure in the history of the department? And, or since they started issuing them and blah. And the judge said, you can't show that it's a business necessity, therefore firefighters can have beards. And they didn't argue really OSHA or the positive pressure aspect. So bottom line is, what we see here in Cleveland is this court aligning itself with the court in FDNY, Atlantic City, and Jacksonville. And again, I think there's a couple of others of recent vintage that are all saying the same thing, that OSHA regulations give the fire department the grounds to enforce these regulations without regard to race discrimination or disability claims. So,
and it makes sense. And it makes sense. I mean, it's a valid reason. It's not,
I thought that was an interesting quote from the case. Let me just, simply put, Cleveland must be able to enforce the OSHA regulations as written, lest it be required on a case-by-case basis to reinvent the government's own wheel. And in other words, to reinvent based on an individual employee circumstance, whether or not the deviation is warranted. And, I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's consistent with the more recent decisions that are out there. What it does leave, and for those of you out there that are supportive of firefighters in beards, which I know there's a palpable group out there that feel that this is unnecessarily burdensome. The solution is research. Whether it's NIST, whether it's NIOSH, maybe both of them, but someone needs to kind of tackle this and look at the science, and has the interface technology, the materials now that they're using in SCBA face pieces, has it advanced to the point where a beard doesn't pose that risk? That's a scientific question. That is not a legal question. You can turn it into a legal question. You can try to turn it into a discrimination. You can try to turn it into a religious, all the different things that an enterprising young firefighter might want to argue. But at the end of the day, it's science. And when the science is there, then the regulations should change.
That makes sense. I said that makes sense.
Yeah, that's, and I know people are very passionate about it, whether it's, again, religion, race, disability, all of the different things that come together. Let's let the science figure it out, if it can be figured out. And if we're at the point now where maybe the regs could be relaxed, then relax the regs. If not, you can't claim it's race discrimination or religious discrimination or anything, without the science behind it. So, all right, you want to take on the US Forest
utilities? The next one comes out of California, and it's a settlement between U.S. Forest Service and a California utility, Southern California Edison, which is one of the larger utility companies out there in California. It was $80 million settlement, and it stems from a wildfire back in, I think it was 2017. It was the Thomas Fire, which, I mean, it's I don't know about you, but I lose track. There's so many fires out there. You almost lose track of which ones are worse than the next. It's just, they seem to be, the next one is worse than the one previous. It's kind of like a revolving door out there. But anyway, the utility has caught a lot, this particular utility caught a lot of heat after this fire, no pun intended, from a variety of folks. As far as, I guess there were some claims about whether or not the wires weren't maintained, the underbrush that was kind of along the poles when it went through areas where there weren't many homes or residents was not kept down low, so that if there was a malfunction in the wiring and a spark went down, that it would cause a huge fire. And obviously, it's just, these numbers just boggle your mind, and you really kind of think about this fire burned 280,000 acres in 2017, including 150,000 acres of forest. I think there was one firefighter and one civilian who were killed in the fire. They estimate 2.2 billion in damages. So the impact of this fire was incredible. So as a result, a lot of people are suing. A bunch of folks are suing the utility provider there. In this particular, it's a settlement of 80 million to the Forest Service, which at least will help kind of repay or recoup some of the damages that were caused, and I'm assuming the costs that were outlaid by the fire service in responding to the fire. It's the quote here was interesting. Obviously, the utility's not denying, they're still denying any responsibility, and they're basically just agreeing to the settlement to avoid the uncertainty of litigation, the usual kind of stuff. But it's a significant settlement, provides significant compensation to the taxpayers for the extensive costs of fighting the Thomas fire and for widespread damage to public lands. Because obviously, it's the Forest Service was the ones that were making the claim here. They were the plaintiffs here. So they're hopefully able to kind of recoup some of those costs. I don't know if you have anything to try. It's
well, there's so many cases like this, and I try, like in a given week, I try to give sort of a representative sample of all the cases. But there's a number of cases on utilities. We're watching the fires out of Maui, the lawsuits as a result, and those are primarily directed at the utility, but also directed at some of the municipal decision making as well. But you question, like, if you step back from the incident and you kind of look globally, like, what can we as a society do to encourage or require the utilities to prevent these kind of catastrophes?
Yeah.
And it inevitably means more. They've got to spend more of their money in it. And on the other hand, we don't want to bankrupt them. And a number of utilities have gone bankrupt. Okay. We don't want to bankrupt them because now we're left with how do we get our electricity and the other things that we need in society. So, but if we provide them with immunity, then they have no incentive to prevent these things from happening, So I don't know. I don't think we've quite figured out where the balance point in this is. I really am watching those the cases that are coming out of Maui, and and California. I mean, Pacific Gas and Electric, a number of other ones have been on the receiving end of some of these multi-million-dollar lawsuits and
settlements and lawsuits.
And where's it going to end? I don't know, but we got to find a way to encourage them to do everything possible to prevent the wildfire. Which I don't think that.
And I think investing in the infrastructure for these organizations is hard. Like, there's significant amounts of money in investing in that and building it up. So I'm sure that, like everything else, and we see it on the fire service side. What luck do we have getting city officials to invest in the fire department infrastructure, right? And that's just I think you can draw some similarities there. That's a challenge.
For sure.
So
all right. Well, last case.
The last case, another one. This is like Colorado Springs almost. This was just I don't know. And you got to look back to. I think you got to kind of, at least in my opinion, I was reading it. And then I'm kind of, all right, let's go back to when this was. You kind of have to almost like back up and say, okay, this is in the heart of the pandemic, right? I mean, that's kind of this was a situation where the case involves an arbitrator that just reinstated some California firefighters.
Well, I want to caution you. And I know you and I haven't had this conversation, but apparently YouTube has this obsession with the C word here. And they have bots that listen to every word that is spoken. And if you use the C word, the video gets
Okay, thank
flagged,
you.
and we've already got a warning. So
Okay,
what Brad and I do is we just call it the C word.
okay,
We have the V word
okay,
for that thing that sometimes people get injected, and because we don't want to run afoul of any of
okay,
YouTube's the YouTube police
okay.
correct police. So we don't want to use those words here.
All
And
right,
so I'm
all
sorry
right.
for interrupting you, but just and
No,
by
thank
the
you,
way,
because I would
I
have,
hope everybody is aware of this. I think it's outrageous that YouTube is doing this, but it is
we
what
would
it
be
is.
in, we would have been in YouTube jail here in a few minutes, I think,
Oh,
if
seriously,
otherwise.
they'll ban one more time. They're going to ban us
So,
for
all
a
right.
week. We get a week ban. So
So I'll have to carefully think this through. But if you think back to when this was, you can kind of see at that particular time a great deal of uncertainty. So go back to the some firefighters responded. I think it looked like it was a nursing home. Is that kind of
I
what
think it
did you
was, yeah,
get?
it
It
was some
was,
sort of
yeah.
a post-operative care facility, I believe is what
Yeah,
it was.
for the call was for CPR in progress,
Yep.
and they responded, and they apparently they stayed outside, and they were citing a state law. And I don't know, Kurt, are you familiar with that? With I know there was one of the things that was,
I've got a little bit more of an understanding that there was
yeah,
a fire department policy and I think some guidance from the state on how to deal with the C word.
yeah,
And so what these folks did was they basically were in communication with the people inside, said, just bring them out.
yeah,
And the people said, apparently we need some help inside. And now what if you think about it, what has to happen? These folks have got to get their protective gear on and suit up and check, all the things that they've got to check to go in. And in the meantime, the people came out, and there was some allegations that they waited outside for 10 minutes. And the information I have, I spoke to someone who's involved in this. They said when they actually timed the video, the police officer involved in this
yeah,
case, the police officer who went in to assist in wheeling the patient out, the video showed that it was only about 2 minutes.
yeah. I was gonna
So
say it was less than three. Yeah,
yeah. So essentially, these folks were, trying to balance a couple of different things, and sometimes a story gets out there in the public, and it goes and it goes and it goes, and sometimes I think sometimes the fire department administration feels like the easiest solution is to just sort of cut and run and discipline the firefighters,
yeah,
and not have to explain all the details of why what they did wasn't really as bad as it looked. That's the only explanation I have here for why
yeah.
the arbitrator, after 5 days of hearing all the facts, after all the emotions, after everything has all calmed down, the arbitrator said these guys were over the top punished,
Yeah.
and they really shouldn't have been punished the way that they were.
Yeah, because I think the department fired two, correct? And there was one that was suspended for a week without pay.
Yeah,
So
right.
the arbitrator reinstated
They,
the two that were fired, and I think they imposed a disciplinary action on them, right? But it
I
was
think it was a 1 week. There was a
yeah,
1 week suspension.
yeah, without pay.
Um,
Yeah, so
right,
so basically, the two firefighters got 1 week suspension without pay.
right.
And then the firefighter who was also suspended initially, the one that was not terminated of the three,
Yeah.
his was basically it was overturned as well.
He was found not to have done
Yeah.
anything wrong. So,
So
I
that
think
was
when you talk about how long you and I might spend on a case like this, or how long the news media spends on a case like this, we're talking minutes to hours. You're
yeah,
talking about an arbitrator who heard 5 days of testimony. Who's got the better insight into what actually happened?
yeah,
And arbitrators could be wrong. That's not to say that the decision was 100% certain, but I think that speaks to and it's I think the most important thing is it's divorced from the emotion
yeah,
and political
political.
sensitivity of this, because no chief wants to be responsible for condoning this kind of behavior. The behavior that was alleged, that they stood outside and refused to go in for 10 minutes,
Yeah,
and basically the man died because they refused to go in. Nobody wants to condone that or be viewed as condoning that kind of behavior, but sometimes there's more to a story. And the long story sometimes doesn't line up with what the short story is about media is.
And if you just Google search this, you know, and grab the news postings regarding this particular case, you didn't come away with a very good feeling about the firefighters that were standing outside.
Right. Well, once again, somebody
that's
five or 10 minutes, or 10 minutes thinking about it, and then post something on social media, slam it. I'm talking about some, you know, some nationally known folks, you know, coming out slamming, you know, what was done. Now, again, you have the allegations, but then you have the after action report and understanding, fuller understanding of what exactly happened. And, you know, I don't think we've had a case here where there's been a winner, and I don't see this week anyway, and it doesn't look like this one is any different. There's no winners in this one. Even the firefighters who got their jobs back, they were out of work for a while. So
and again, put in a very difficult position. Very, I mean, that's you can't help but my 2 cents at least.
Hopefully our commentary doesn't offend the folks at YouTube. You know, they don't mind us talking harshly about YouTube. They just don't like us talking about that other thing. So apparently, you know, that's verboten. We can't talk about it. So, all right, man. Well, that's it. We're here in Vail, Colorado. My wife and I we're here in Vail, Colorado, and we got a class coming up, the discipline class, the next couple of days. So hopefully we're going to hit the slopes for a little bit today, and you know, get the class done. So,
all right.
Well, anything you want to add?
No, we're good.
You got a class coming up?
I do. March 20th, regular rate, advanced regular rate, calculating the first regular rate for first responders and the firefighters and other first responders. It's always a good class. And
we got quite a few folks registered, and you know, a lot of interest in it. And for folks who don't know what regular rate is, it's the rate at which overtime is calculated, and that is not your normal contract rate or what you perceive to be your hourly rate. It has to take into account some additional things. So this class really gets into a lot of those nuanced areas where things like holiday pay, vacation pay, shift differential, acting out of rank, or step up pay, all of those things have to be factored into an employee's overtime.
Yeah. And it's good because it's such an important topic, and we dedicate a couple hours to it in the 3-day FLSA class that we teach, and we go pretty in depth. But obviously, you could spend hours and hours on it. So we kind of take that base knowledge there. We start out there, and we're able to kind of take I like to call it a deep dive into the different things, and we can kind of go down a rabbit hole that we can't do when we're moving along in the 3-day class.
Yeah, the 3-day class, we're covering so much. I mean, we do cover it. I think folks will come away with a good understanding of it. But for folks who you know, are possibly feel like their overtime is being improperly calculated, or for payroll folks, or those who in the fire department are responsible for properly calculating it, excuse me, this program's invaluable. We're not aware of any software out there that does the calculations properly, by the way. It's just there's too many moving parts, and we're too small a segment out of all of the possible employees in the United States for any company to invest the amount of resources that would be required to come up with this kind of a software package. So some do it better than others. None of it do it perfectly. And if you don't do it perfectly, then you open yourself up to the potential for an FLSA lawsuit.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, that's going to do it for another Fire Law Roundup. Bill, I'll see you when we get back.
Absolutely. Enjoy your day.
All right, take care.